In the early 1990s, researchers placed volunteers inside a pitch-black, completely soundproofed anechoic chamber. Inside this absolute sensory deprivation, participants put on a modified yellow snowmobile helmet. Roughly 80% of the people who wore it reported feeling an invisible presence sharing the room with them. Depending on their background, they interpreted the feeling as a deceased loved one, an angel, or even God. On the surface, a crude piece of winter gear appeared to be summoning the supernatural on demand. The device was created by Canadian neuroscientist Michael Persinger. He designed it to study neurotheology, the biological relationship between brain activity and mystical experiences. The helmet was rigged with electromagnetic coils, positioned to pulse specific, fluctuating magnetic fields directly into the skull. The scientific community watched closely. If the machine worked, it meant spiritual experiences could be isolated and mapped to a single, localized God spot in the human brain. A later replication attempt dismantled the device's technical claims, shifting the focus from the magnetic hardware to a specific vulnerability in human perception. Persinger designed his experiments to test his Vectorial Hemisphericity Hypothesis. He proposed that the human mind is composed of two separate halves. He argued that our dominant, language-heavy left hemisphere shares the skull with a quiet, subordinate right hemisphere. Normally, these two halves communicate flawlessly, passing data back and forth to maintain a constant equilibrium. That unbroken neural bridge generates our steady sense of self. The God helmet targeted the temporal lobes, the brain regions situated roughly behind your ears that process memory and emotion. It fired weak magnetic fields directly into that tissue. Persinger believed the magnetic pulses briefly scrambled the communication bridge between hemispheres. During the static, the quiet right hemisphere fired a sudden signal into the dominant left. Unrecognized, the left brain projected the feeling outward, interpreting it as a physical entity sharing the room. Persinger concluded that every ghost sighting, every alien abduction, and profound mystical encounter could be explained by this temporary neurological glitch. The theory dominated discussions of neurotheology until 2005, when researchers at Uppsala University in Sweden attempted a rigorous double-blind replication. They replicated the exact environment. Subjects sat in the dark room, wore the helmet, and still reported overwhelming, tear-inducing encounters with spiritual entities. Then the researchers checked the data. There was absolutely no difference in the experiences between the subjects who had the magnetic fields turned on and those who wore the helmet with the power completely turned off. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins famously tested the helmet for a BBC documentary. He reported feeling nothing but mild relaxation and slight dizziness. If the magnetic fields were dead, what invisible force was actually operating in that pitch-black room? The results in Persinger's lab were driven by extreme human suggestibility and the placebo effect. When you strip away a person's sight and sound, place them in an isolating laboratory, and tell them they might feel a presence, their brain starves for input. It begins to manufacture the exact encounters it expects to see. Modern neuroscientists agree that spiritual experiences require complex, synchronized networks firing across the entire brain. They cannot be toggled on and off with a single magnetic switch. The experiments suggest that under the right conditions of sensory deprivation and anticipation, the brain will project its own occupants into the room. In the absence of external reality, the mind creates its own.